The last general election, my next three guests appeared on the show to discuss a campaign against a background of Bertie Ahern's ongoing difficulties with the tribunal. Someone claimed that the discussion on this show turned the tide for Fianna Fáil and they returned to government again. Well, the three gentlemen are back, this time against a background of collapsing revenues, of soaring job losses and a discredited banking sector. I want you to welcome, please, Senator Eoghan Harris, Eamon Dumphy and John Waters. You're very welcome to the show. Very different times, Eamon. Very different times from the first time you were on together. Where are we now?
We're probably in bigger than any other country in the developed world. Our credit worthiness, we rank at the bottom of that league, below countries like Greece. We have a discredited government, a discredited ruling elite, discredited bankers, auditors who should have been doing their job, also discredited. And we have, I believe, terrible, desperate, oncoming unemployment and suffering for ordinary people who bought into unbelievable dreams to buy houses, two people working, to get hundreds of thousands of pounds in mortgages who they have no chance of paying now. If one person loses their job or if they both lose their job, the houses won't be worth what they paid for them. We were all seduced by this. Every one of us. I was, everybody was. But the people responsible for governing the country and enforcing regulations, the people particularly in the central bank and the Department of Finance, who could have seen what's coming, even when we were here before the last election. They said nothing, they sat on their hands, and they've allowed this country to slide into a place where we never thought we'd be. And it is the ordinary person going to suffer, not these people who caused this problem.
We don't really know, though, whether the permanent civil service, for example, who are the experts, the politicians are not necessarily experts, whether there was a tussle between them as to who would sway. I mean, there may have been people crying stop, but civil servants can't their necks above the parapet and say, I am the secretary of this department, that department.
Sorry, Pat.
The politicians call the shots.
It's a simple fact here. The President, Brian Callan, was the Minister for Finance for 4 years. And during those 4 years, many, many people foretold what has happened to this economy. Why didn't he understand it? Why did he continue to run the country on the basis of revenue coming through the exchequer from stamp duty, from this housing bubble? He kept spending that money and he put it out there as if it was meant to last forever.
But it's a classic bubble behaviour. You always hope that you pass the button to somebody else and then it bursts.
Well, I always hope that it'll be governed by people smarter than I am.
John, I mean, it's a gloomy scenario from Eamon, but very different to what other pundits are saying.
Oh, I think we haven't really got to, in our heads, to an analysis of where we are, because we are still working with the idea that we were poor, then we were rich, now we're poor again. But actually, I think we may approach an analysis which tells us that the period of the Celtic Tiger was a kind of an aberration in which we postponed poverty by, getting ourselves sucked into the global market, by being involved in a bubble, which, as Eamon says, which created this kind of activity for which there was no base, because in all that time we have never actually developed the Irish economy per se.
I mean, in fairness, we were exporting computers, we were making them here, we were exporting food. We were doing okay. If we hadn't done the other stuff, we might have been okay.
But most of our industry was foreign owned. It was here because of low tax rates. And it's here on the whim of the President of the United States, for example, and his tax policy.
Right. We'll talk about where we might go in the future. I'll come to you back in a few minutes. Eoghan, your analysis. I mean, are you as pessimistic as everybody else?
No, not really. I mean, I think I'm very pessimistic as regards where unemployment is going to go in the near future. I predicted it'll hit 700,000. I think there's two things you have to say, and I think the Taoiseach finally found his voice on Thursday night to say. I think any teacher taking over a class that's doing, say, Leaving Cert has to take two lines. He's got to take a hard line and tell the truth and frighten the bejesus out of them, and then he has to give them hope. But one depends on the other, and you can't. The first thing is to take the hard line. And unfortunately, we weren't told how bad it was going to be early on enough. That was 6 months ago when it became clear. It's going to be a lot worse than people. Before it gets better, it'll get worse and worse. I don't really think the next 2 years are going to be anything good. But I'm very concerned about what I would call the kind of anger that's coming off the public. I was dreading coming on here tonight because there's so much unfocused anger in the country. You see, the trouble with anger is that Aristotle used to be angry right people. Now, the first thing is there's a lot of denial going on, which is coming from fear. They're frightened, so they're in denial. Everybody in Ireland participated in the Celtic Tiger. If you doubt that, you're going to walk into any backyard in Ireland and see the decking, the cars. Mary Harney was right, our people are living longer, and that's working class people. Physically, our people look better, they dress better, they're more confident, they've had more foreign holidays. We had the Tiger, the banks didn't put us down and put their feet in our chest at the money. We wanted the money, we're in it. So the kind of denial that says we didn't benefit from it, that's kind of whinging and it's wrong. Now, we benefited, all of us, in the Celtic Tiger. But some of us actually behaved badly during that period. It's important that we identify these people, punish them, but not get obsessed by it. Like, some bankers are corrupt, but like, just because Anglo-Irish Bank was bad doesn't mean that everybody in the Bank of Ireland and Allied Irish Banks is corrupt. This impression is given. So I think that what we've got to do, the handcuffs should have been produced for some of the bankers in some of the banks. Definitely CAB should have been sent in and told to put handcuffs on them. So that should have happened to them.
This would have happened in America.
It would have happened in America.
We saw Mr. Madoff with his in his handcuffs.
The second thing is the professional classes should be dealt with before anybody else was dealt with. The doctors, the dentists, the lawyers, not just capped in their relationship with the state, but capped in the money. I mean, the Man Tribunal couldn't happen now, that kind of blowing of public money. The farming class have got away under the radar very well. Public sectors have to take the brunt, and I think rightly have to take the brunt because they are in permanent pensionable jobs. But they've paid up in the levy. But I do think, for example, it would have helped a lot if the levy had been related and linked to private sector jobs. In other words, when Bertie Ahern came in 1993 as Minister of Finance, he put a levy in everyone, but the levy was only related to creating jobs. So if I was a public sector worker, I wouldn't want to give up money, but I was giving up the money I'd like to feel it was going to creating a job for a private sector worker. So what we had the other night was the reality check. Brian Cowen took us where I'm a great admirer of Sun Tzu, the Chinese military strategist, and he said, when you're in a war and in a terrible place, and we are in a terrible place, make no mistake about it, and it's not an Irish domestic crisis. Everyone tries to pretend that that's wrong. It's a global crisis. Ours is worse than it should have been, but not by much. We'd have had this anyway. And he says, when you're in a terrible place like we're in, he says, you have to go to the death ground. And by the death ground, he meant you put your people with their backs against the river, facing the foe, and you said to your army, you said, fight or die now. And that's what, there's no point, people are talking this rubbish about inspirational speeches. There's no point in Brian Cowen making inspirational speeches if they're empty speeches.
All right, Eamon, were you impressed by Brian Cowen's rhetoric last night?
First of all, Brian Cowen spoke to a Chamber of Commerce meeting to 300 people. He didn't speak to the people of Ireland. He spoke to a room full of people who'd had a few jars of Asian. Now, that's not addressing, that's true. If you lock 300 businessmen in a room, they clap anything. The point is this, he should be speaking, I didn't interrupt, John.
Okay.
The point is this, he should be speaking to the Irish people. President Sarkozy, last night in France, sat down with 3 journalists in a television studio and spoke to the nation and took their questions and answered the questions. It was one way on of assuaging the anger, and I agree with you that anger is futile. One way of assuaging it is if Mr. Cowen, or any of his ministers, but particularly Mr. Cowen, who's very close to these bankers, if he were to come out and say that he shared our anger and our despair. That if he promised, as you indicated in the question, if he promised that we would take tough measures, if he did what Senator Harris said, if he said, I'm going to send the Criminal Assets Bureau after wrongdoing in our banking system. There's a running sore there called Anglo-Irish Bank. We, all of us, collectively have put $2 billion in to own that bank. And the debt in there, we know nothing. But they will not tell us anything about that bank.
Is the problem for Brian Cowen that Obama, in the first few days, he nominated a couple of people who hadn't paid their taxes, and he came out and he said the very words, I screwed up. Now, it's apparent that as Minister of Finance, the bubble got out of control. Is it time for Brian Cowen to come out and say, I'm sorry, folks, I screwed up. I was a minister in charge.
It's time for this. We do need to take our medicine, all of us in this country. But before anybody takes any medicine, this government would have to get a new mandate. They have no authority to govern because people don't believe that they're competent to govern. They're actually incompetent. And until a government is in office that has a mandate from the people with a set of measures to deal with this problem, we won't have industrial peace in this country.
All right, John.
I think the climate at the moment is seeking retribution, and that's bad, because, you know, it's bad enough to be bankrupt, but to be bankrupt and full of hate is worse. And I think we're creating a level of toxicity in our society that is not going to be healthy, and it's not going to help the clarity that we need to solve this problem. I also think that, this kind of going after people, I mean, it might make us feel better in some way, first way, but it's actually not going to solve the problem.
Hold on a minute.
No, it's not.
There's people in Mountjoy prison for very minor offences. There's people in there for shoplifting. Hold on.
That's a separate issue.
You don't like the idea of going after people.
It's a separate issue.
We open the prisons then.
It's a separate issue.
We open the prisons.
The issue
Why not go after a crook?
Going after these guys is not going to get one penny or 1 cent in the exchequer.
What happens 6 months down the line when you have paid your mortgage? They'll come after you. They'll come after you.
That's the kind of thing that gets a clap. No,
but it happens, John.
But it's not going to solve the problem.
It happens.
The problem is
going after people.
We have to go after people. We have to see.
Let John.
Sorry.
I think what's important here is that if we look at the way that this crisis, the solutions are proposed, the public is demanding some kind of retribution. The politicians are on a completely different track, and that track is purely about pain. It's about trying to find cutbacks, which are really kind of microscopic in terms of what's actually the problem. And these are causing huge levels of resentment already, even though they haven't even started to bite yet. They're all, I think, economically not very sensible. I mean, to take the 50 quid that Nurse Ireland has left over after paying all the fixture in any given week, take that out of their pocket and therefore out of the economy is going to have other consequences downstream. So I don't think economically these guys are thinking deep enough. Now, I think also there's a kind of a moral stroke economic issue that we need to address. And this is that this crisis erupted because of banking, global banking, domestic banking, certainly. But it happened because the banking industry followed the bubble and sucked us all into it. And it all burst then. And a lot of people, as Eamon says, they have huge debts for property that is nowhere near the value of the debt. And we have to now, as taxpayers, bail out the banks. And I'm not making a complaint about that, of course, because you need banks in your, you have to. But isn't there something wrong with the idea that the taxpayer has to dip into one pocket to keep the bank open, and and then dip into the other pocket to pay back a debt which is grossly inflated by the fact that the bank wasn't functioning properly in the first place? Now,
I read on the front page of the Indo this morning, by the way, there was a story, whether it'll come to pass or not, is that there's some sort of scheme being cooked up, which would prevent the seizure of homes by banks.
I don't think that's enough. I think you need to actually cut debt. You actually need a blanket cut.
It would only be for 6 months, that's key. What should be done is, if people were induced to take mortgages out on a basis of 100% that they clearly couldn't afford, and everyone in the country knows the banks were massaging the figures to get people to take mortgages they really couldn't afford. Yeah. Nobody who was induced into that should be put out of their home, ever.
I don't think that's enough. I think you need more practical. You need something more practical. Sorry. But you need to offer people hope now. And I think that if the government, why can't the government go and say, look, we are now propping up the banking system. The people are propping up the banking system. So what we ask for the banking in return is that you slice off the top 20% of everybody's debt and give people a glimmer of light at the end of that tunnel.
Okay.
Can I go back over some of the things that were said? First of all, Eamon's point about the commerce. There's a lot of stupid kind of armchair pundits have been writing about Brian Cowen's need to address the nation and to give inspirational speeches. Like, again, I go back to the death ground. Churchill didn't give inspirational speeches. First of all, he was at war with Germany, so that was the necessity of the situation. They were on the death ground. He didn't say everything is fine and there's nothing wrong with it. He said, we're going to have to actually fight beaches on the streets, in our back gardens and in our homes. That was pretty terrifying stuff. That's the death ground. No, Brian Cowen said that the other night. He said it to the Dublin Chamber of Commerce because they're the people who are going to have to deliver the jobs. But that's not all. I think the reason why he doesn't do that in the Dáil is much the same reason as I am to in the Shannon. I cannot actually speak in the Shannon properly. I'll tell you why. Because it's a game. While I'm talking, they're texting, they're speaking, they're waiting to heckle, they're waiting to get in. He would not be allowed to finish a paragraph in it. He's a man who likes to think in a sustained way. This was an audience of sincere people who wanted to hear what he had to say. They weren't drunk, they got to their feet. He said it there because this is what he's comfortable saying. And he said it with great power. And having said what he was doing, he was telling us, he was giving us the hard line. He was telling us truth, and having told us the truth, we now can actually deal with the whole part.
Can I ask you just a kind of a technical question? Yeah. It was an accident that the Dublin Chamber had it recorded. Mm-hmm. He was talking to people. Now we know because it happened to be recorded. Or are we being spun again? Did he know it was recorded? Did he know it was going to come out?
You could look at his body language. He feels uncomfortable talking in a sustained way to the door. He does not feel comfortable in a television studio talking to the nation. He feels comfortable, as I do, in smaller. Now he has to find a way to talk on to maybe by recording these kind of things. But he likes to talk to sincere people.
Should mea culpa in there? Should he actually say, I contributed to this. I was finance minister during the worst part of the bubble, when the bubble was at breaking point.
That is absolutely ridiculous. That's like Tony Blair going on apologising to the family. We'd spend our time apologising
more
for
recent.
Like, it is. Brian Cohen was Minister of Finance. Bertie Ahern was Minister of Finance in 1993. Brought in, unemployment was massively higher, as bad as it is now. He brought in this levy. He put the country on his feet. Brian Cohen did great work. Brian Cohen is the best Taoiseach we have right now. He's the best chance to get us out.
He's the only one.
There is no alternative. And he's good. I'll tell you why he's good. I didn't know he was as good as that until I saw him actually, or heard about this in action. I know now that he has the stuff. He can produce the stuff, and he will produce the stuff to lead us out. And the hope part I'm talking about is what we should go to now. But before you hope, you've got to know the truth. It's like, look, when I was diagnosed with cancer last year, the first thing I wanted to do was, why me? I wanted to go into victim mode. Like, the audience, people in this country have two choices. Things are really bad. They have two choices. They can say, oh my God, why me? I'm going to die. Or you can say, how do I deal with this? Now, what my consultant did, he said, these are the options you've got. This is my plan. Brian Cowen last night, or on Thursday night, began to give us the plan. And we can talk about how it should be done. My own personal view is that the two larger banks should be amalgamated, that the government should buy up the shareholdings, get rid of the toxic debt, that they should give a tax rebate of $8,000 to every household in the country, which would be confined to paying off their mortgage, that they give a mortgage sabbatical to people on a means-tested basis, that the banks, amalgamated bank, Ryanair. I know that people say, why would we worry about the public finances? Maybe we should fix the economy first. But fundamentally, we're broke. We're nearly broke. We've got to fix the public finances, and the only way to do that, fundamentally, is to fix up is to take the public sector are paying up at the moment. They're helping us through this. It should be linked. But if we're going into this war, as we are, together, then some of us can't be wearing 5 life belts and others 2. The Waterford workers, the Dell workers, they have no life belt at all. We have to learn that the good days are over. And I thought he was very good to say that the other night. He said, we had great times. We had better times than our children are going to have. That's as hard a meeting on the death ground as I've ever heard. That's the truth.
Well, I certainly think that the times are going to be very hard, much harder than they are now for the ordinary people of the country, and for all of us, and our children will suffer because of this. And I feel that unless we come together as a people, we won't get through it. And to do that, we need leadership. You do need leadership. You need people leading by example. We see every day, Pat, we see bankers, politicians. Look at the politicians. The regulator who failed the regulation system, Pat Neary, walked away last week with a golden handshake of €3,000, and he'll have a pension of €130,000 index-linked for life. Now, I don't want to advise one gentleman, but the people who are responsible for this. Brian Goggin is the Chief Executive of the Bank of Ireland. He took home $3 million last year. Now, Brian Cowen proposed that he might take a 25% cut, which means he'd only take home over $200,000, right? Barack Obama said yesterday, or the day before yesterday, that no banker on Wall Street should get more than $500 who was availing of bailout. Our Taoiseach earns more than the President of the United States. Our junior ministers earn more than United States senators. Now, this is madness is going on.
No, but don't forget, your pal Ronaldo earns more than the entire Senate, and there are anomalies everywhere.
Well, I don't think it's an anomaly, Pat, because we're comparing like for like. The leader of the American nation, the political leader of the United States of America, earns less than the political leader of this country. Now, it goes right across.
But once he retires after 8 years, which he has to do, he could be a multi-millionaire within 3 months.
I'm not denying that Brian Cowen, and I know Brian Cowen. I have respect for Brian Cowen. I'm not denying that he has given his life to public service. But what I am saying is he has to be accountable for the way he behaved as Minister of Finance and the way he's leading the country now. And the Green Party, who I advocated to vote for last time, they're propping him up. And they'll go the same way as the PDs. Because we do need a change of government, because the medicine that we're going to have to take collectively will have to be administered by somebody who is credible and has authority.
As soon as they throw Patricia McCann out of the party, they'll have another bounce in the polls. They went up in the polls because they stood firmly by the government. The PDs went down because Michael McDowell did there. The Greens are holding the line, and they went up in the polls. And when they throw messes like Patricia McCann, they'll go up in the polls again, I believe.
John Waters.
I think the problem really is that everybody's talking about taking the pain, everybody's talking about the hard decisions and all that. This is the language I remember in the 80s, and then it was relevant because it was a domestic situation. This is not. This is a global situation. And we're especially vulnerable because we're so exposed. We're an open economy which hasn't developed itself properly and which is very much beholden to multinational industry and to all kinds of issues which are not in our control. So we need actually to have, a full range of options on the table. And I think that, it's very interesting to actually see. I remember, going back 20 years ago, people like Raymond Crotty were then talking about repudiating the debt, and people would rubbish this and say this is lunacy. But it's a strange thing, in the last 6 months, if you said 6 months ago, if you talked about nationalising the bank, the people who said that nonsense will be saying this was nonsense as well. So I believe that there are radical proposals now which could be put out there, which will be rubbished by the establishment, which in 6 months, when we have no choice, will have to be embraced.
Are you suggesting repudiating the debt?
I think we need to actually look at the moral context in which the debt was accrued and ask ourselves, is the respectability of the Irish political establishment more important than our children's future? Now, that's the kind of
if you repudiate debt, you get no money from anywhere. No one will lend you money. There will be people.
That's what they always say. But
starving.
other countries have done this kind of thing, and it's been okay.
Just get bogged down the actual practical details. Can I just say something else? And it goes back to again being diagnosed with cancer. We were told bad stuff by the Taoiseach the other night. I think it's the truth. He told us the truth. When he said our children won't do as well as we did. Just let me finish, Eamon. We had the golden days. But the thing is that everything passes. This country saw out Vikings, saw out Cromwell, saw every kind of misery and suffering, and we're still around. We're going to be around in 5 years and in 10 years. And we're going to be around. We're going to be around in our own terms. We're going to be around. Just let me finish, John. We're going around if we actually do look after each other. And that means that we have to stop taking the way
we survived by hemorrhaging half our population at the time.
Yeah.
That we survived all.
But they go voluntarily now, and they're happy to go voluntarily. They come back and they come back to the Celtic Tiger.
I don't know what is voluntarism in this context. But
there's another theory that if we had managed to get through the famine and had 8 million people on the island, we would have 12 million people on the island now. Would be an internal economy which would actually keep us going in a far more healthy way.
But the point they're trying to make about is that people are talking as if some kind of apocalyptic thing. You see, when the worst happens to you, that's why I'm for the worst being told to us. You actually can cope with it. In some ways, if they come for your house and they say, you lose your job, in some way, then you're not thinking there's something else worse going to happen. You know the worst and you deal with it.
Look, when you don't have your home and the sheriff knocks on the door...
Nobody's going to be taking a home off anybody now. That's clear from their statement today.
It's not clear. They
said you get a
6-month...
They won't anymore.
Well, let me tell you something.
They won't be allowed to anymore.
Homes were repossessed in the court this week. It's happening every day.
The watershed has come in.
Oh, you're talking in... Let's talk reality. People, if you come home and have to tell your children that you've lost your job, or that your mother's lost her job,
they can't sell
that you've got no help, just listen to me. And get
down to the bank. They can't sell it even.
I talked to John. I talked to you. If you have to go home and say that you've lost your job, that you won't be able to feed your children, that you might lose your home, just a shadow of threat, that you might lose your home, it's desperately, while people are walking around in this town with buckets of money, while people in political classes and the professional classes who destroyed the people of this country, not just in the crisis, the haemophiliacs, the people with hepatitis C, the victims of the Stardust who had to wait 28 years to get some vindication the other day that it wasn't arson and it wasn't done by their own community. Those people had to wait for their justice, and I could go on and on and on.
Eamon, you made the point there about people being afraid of losing their jobs. There is a bit too much fear around. There are people who are not going to lose their jobs, and their kids are terrified.
My father lost his job 50-odd years ago, and I remember how I felt that night. Yeah. We nearly lost our home, and I remember how I felt that night, and I'm a lucky person. And I don't want people to endure because of incompetence or crookedness. And the people who did it to little children now and ordinary people deserve to be held accountable. And the High Court respect them. So, if Brian Cowan would do one thing, and I pay compliments, I don't want to be disrespectful to Mr. Cowan. If he'd do one thing, would he send a High Court inspector into Anglo-Irish Bank, where Mr. Sean Fitzpatrick presided for 20 years, and would he find out what happened? That's all.
And when he's done that, and when Eamon has stopped has finished milking the situation. We're still left with the 500,000 unemployed. We're still left with the problems. And we won't be able to cope with it if we go on just scapegoating and being angry and being full of fear and full panic. We've got to have the plan to deal with the cancer, to deal with the problem. And the Taoiseach outlined the first steps, I thought, in taking this situation by the scruff of the neck. That bodes well for us. We are not going to wander. We are going to go through this together, and we're in much better condition for this long march than we were at any other period of history. You're going to look, as I said, at the health of our children. Most people have it now. Most people have well appointed now. Most people, in fact, have a feeling of confidence that came from the last 10 years. We're not going into it in a sort of a holy way.
But the point,
it's not a movie. It's not a, it's a life. It's not a film.
But who
it's not a movie.
Film?
And you're giving all this long march talk and walls of bets.
It is a long march. We're facing a long recession.
That's a movie.
It's of critical importance.
That's a movie. People are living.
We're facing a long...
People are losing their jobs.
Eamon, stop playing to the gallery.
It's not the gallery.
You are playing to the gallery.
Am I?
You are, yeah.
Okay.
Eamon,
but you ask the gallery. That's the gallery. That's the gallery. Are you talking? Look, Owen, I like you, Owen. You know I do, and I respect you.
Yeah,
but I'm telling you, you can't go on, come on here and be a cheerleader, Brian Cowan. Could have it. You can't do it. You can't do it, Owen. You did it for Bertie. You can't do it. This guy has to come out with his hands up and answer for the Irish people. He's got to answer to the Irish people for the things that he is accountable for.
That's the worst of populism. It's cheap populism, and it will not actually create one job.
It would satisfy people if they heard him come out instead of going and talking to the business classes last night.
It would give them no satisfaction whatsoever, not create one job.
Why did he go behind closed doors, talk to 300 suits last night?
He talked to 300 men whose job it is to create employment. He talked to them calmly, soberly and steadily about what must be done.
Why won't he talk to us?
Calm plan. Eamon, you're just practicing what Lenin called excitative terror. People working up crowds with no real solid calm plan behind it. That's no use to us.
Like that Barack Obama fella.
Barack Obama has not yet been tested. Barack Obama has not yet been tested. And Brian Cowan, I believe, on the basis of what I heard the other night, is a man who knows how serious things are, who is telling the truth, the right man now. We have to look to him for leadership. I believe we'll get it.
Just clarification, the Department of Finance, obviously working very late tonight, they were on to say no money was put into Anglo-Irish Bank. I mean, we own it. God knows what we're in hock for as owners, but no billions have been put into that bank. Okay, just want to clarify that.
Yeah.
And can I look for any glimmer of optimism and hope? I mean, on my radio programme, we've been campaigning to do things. You know, let's get an insulation programme going. Let's sort out the problem so we get things moving quickly. Let's clean things. Anything that is revenue neutral at worst, we should do. It might take a punt on something. If it's not going to lose the exchange, what's wrong with giving it a go? And we seem to be paralysed.
But I think, you see, this kind of thing has happened before. I mean, this isn't the first time in human history that there's been a crisis like this. You know, and countries have recovered. You know, back in the 90s, Sweden and Finland had a problem, and they detached themselves from the Deutschmark. They devalued their currencies, and within 2 or 3 years, they're back on their feet again. Now, you know, if we have the full options available,
we don't.
We don't.
We can't devalue.
Well, who says?
Well, it means getting out of the euro if we do.
Well, yeah, okay, maybe, but let's consider, let's have a proper discussion instead of people telling us that the only option is the knife and that we have to beggar our children in order to survive. I mean, that's not an option.
But some of the deals that, for example, Iceland, which kept out of the EU and managed to hang on to its fish, in order to come out of bankruptcy as a country, it's really going to have to give its fish to the EU. Now, what kind of a Faust deal is that?
But if we can't discuss the thing properly, if we don't have a proper discussion, if the decisions are made behind closed doors and the options are decided and nothing else is allowed, maybe, as I said, you know, months ago, the very people who would repudiate the idea would have repudiated...
So you're saying everything should be on the table?
Everything should be on the table.
Eamon, a glimmer of hope, maybe?
Well, the only glimmer of hope, I mean, is that we get a more just society, Pat. A more just society and more accountable society. And we'll be suffering that will induce that. Because I don't think a generation down the line we'll ever allow ourselves to be governed and to be ruled by the people.
Do you have a problem, by the way? There is a political class, there are dynasties, family dynasties, from where we draw a lot of our politicians. The same is true of the professions.
It is.
Same sort of...
It's a problem for this country. There's a mafia out in this country. And the media are by no means free in this. I mean, there were property supplements fueling profits in every media outlet in this country, particularly in the newspaper industry that I'm part of. So I'm not saying that it's all politicians, but I'm saying that we'll have to take a good, long, hard look at ourselves, and we need a more just and fair society.
Oh, give me hope.
I think secession is like a grim reaper that shines a kind of a dark searchlight on all aspects of Irish society. I think people are in denial if they try and pretend they weren't part of the Celtic Tiger and that most of our people didn't benefit, because most of our people did. But what the recession revealed a huge in the political class to which I belong now. They're still in denial because otherwise they would have taken a 30% cut. I took a cut. It's not enough. I believe they'll be forced to take 30% before this recession is over. It's revealed weaknesses in the professional classes. They've been feather bedding. The Mahon tribunals for 150 million was a disgrace. It's going to reveal weaknesses in the farming class, and it's going to reveal all sorts of cracks and weaknesses in our society. But that allows us to reform them. Beyond that, though, there is hope, because for three reasons. First of all, everything passes, and we've been through stuff like this before. Secondly, we're in good condition. This is something that people are in denial about. The country is in far better condition than it was in my childhood and in my teens. There's more confidence, wealth, our people are better travelled, better educated, they look better, they have actually been in more places, they're able to cope. And thirdly, it's very important that we understand that there's lots we can do. We have 18.2 billion National Reserve Fund in the Pension Reserve Fund. We could do anything with that.
If this is not a rainy day,
we could buy back. This should be used today. It should be used to buy up.
It's the family silver at the moment. Should we spend it?
Well, I think we should use it.
Can I just finish? And we do need hope. And remember that the part is to just do what you have to do every day. And small things are important. It's important that we qualify for the World Cup. It's important that we win the Six Nations Cup. It's important the county board thing is fixed. All sorts of... We have to get on our life from minute to minute too. We talk about macro horrors all we like. But that sort of excited terror does not allow people... We don't need kind of mad Irish Parliamentary Party orations. We need the Michael Collins kind of calm head. And I think Brian Cowan will do a good job on that.
Yeah, well, all I can say, since you did bring up the sport, when we think back to the bad old days in the 80s, what do we remember? Do we remember dole queues? Do we remember emigrant ships or planes? Now, a lot of the things we remember are the great sporting moments.
Yeah,
Stuttgart and
we're a
things
great
like
sport country, and I think people will take great succour from sport, whatever the sport is.
Thank you all very much for coming in. Senator Owen Harris, Eamon Dumphy and John Wallace. Thanks a million for being with us tonight.